Thanks for joining us. I'm Nancy Furness with We've Got Issues. And before we get started with today's program, I just want to acknowledge that we are on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of Coquitlam First Nations. So we thank the Coquitlam people who continue to live on these lands and to protect the lands and the waters and all that lies above and below. So we're coming up to September 30th, which is the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. And so today we're going to start a conversation. And joining me is Ernie Cardinal. So thanks for being here, Ernie.
Thank you, Nancy. It's an honor to be back here. I actually love your show, and it's just so fun to be here. And what a location.
We got really lucky. I think the sun might even come out for us. So we're in the beautiful Donald Parkway. And I just want to start by asking you, Ernie, what is truth and reconciliation, and why have we suddenly started talking about it?
Well, you know what, Nancy, what I love about our location is we are right now up against a beautiful cedar tree, right? Which represents more than just medicine to the West Coast people here, but absolutely life. And when me and you sat down, I pulled up this beautiful Canadian maple leaf, right? Like, look at the colors, like, you know, the whole bit. But it was underneath because the maple tree is right next to us. But what a good representation of what our conversation is, because what it is we're talking about the Indigenous people that have been here since the start of millennia, and now Canada is now part of our, story. So the leaf is underneath next to our roots. So when we talk about truth and reconciliation, we look at it like this tree of life in front of us, and there's so many branches. There's so many different meanings of what truth and reconciliation. Reconciliation is like, what does Christmas mean to you, right? Now, of course, for most of your viewers out there, that probably means family, happiness, together, sense of belonging. But if you ask a 7-year-old, they're going to scream out toys, right? And unfortunately, there's a lot of people out there that dread it because it's loneliness and regret. So when we talk about reconciliation, it's kind of the same thing. My reconciliation is about education. It's about getting out there and just informing the people. And for me, Nancy, it's like a tightrope walk, because sometimes when I'm on that wire, I have to balance myself so that I can understand that it's not me hitting, every individual that's non-Indigenous over the head with genocide, you stole our land, bad person, bad settler, It's not that. So I have to realize that I have to start dialogues where people want to listen, people want to engage, and more importantly, they are going to want to become a powerful ally. So it's the point of being truthful and talking about hard truths, like what really, really matters, right? But at the same time, doing it in a way of acceptance so people can come forward and want to engage. And that really takes a lot of practice, right? So reconciliation to me is education, right? And it's educating not just the children, but the other older generations that have been taught a certain way for so many years that it's ingrained into them. And we have to realize that, okay, I know that, you grew up watching those John Wayne movies. I know you walked and understood about the work ethic of the Canadian, people, which is something we should be proud of. But some of the stereotypes that they listened to were false, right? Like the whole thing about, Indigenous people can just sit at home and we get free money from taxes, or we don't have to pay taxes. Their taxes pay for our livelihood. No, Canada, that's not true. right? I can pull out my check stub and you'll see that I pay just as much taxes, if not more, because I am a single man in Canada. So I pay a lot of taxes, right? And the money that we get actually comes from our treaty rights. So not a penny comes from the Canadian people. Actually, a lot of our monies actually cover the infrastructures to help all Canada. So it's just those little things that we have to deconstruct those myths so we move forward so that everyone understands what the truths are, right? And that's the thing.
Well, I thank you so much for giving those insights, because I think we all need to educate ourselves, and it's very much a learning process. So I think if I could ask just a difficult question, because I know this is a difficult conversation quite often, but when you talk about, education and people being aware of the realities, the last residential school actually closed in 1997, so not very far away. And there's a lot of long-lasting effects, both on the survivors as well as the generations that came after. And recently, of course, we're seeing more and more unmarked graves, children's graves being uncovered. So can you talk a little bit about why the truth and the acknowledgement is so important, and why we can't really truly have reconciliation until we deal with those truths, and why we can't just move on? It's not that simple.
Oh, yes. Move on. You know how many times we've heard that? Move on? How can we move on when we're just starting this whole genocide? Like, we are just realizing now what is happening. So when we talk about moving on, we still have to work through everything that is going on with us right now. Not what happened back in 1946 or 1806 or whatever. This is what's happening to us now. Right now, there are more children in foster care than there was at the height of the residential school system. So when we talk about genocide, we can talk about what's happening now. There are Indigenous women that are left in garbage dumps. Their remains are left in garbage dumps, but our government does not care. They just don't care. Now ask yourself, if it was a non-Indigenous woman, would that be the same case? Would they say, oh, we can't go in there, it's too much money? No, believe me, there would be an outcry. There would be volunteers. There'd be people out there digging up this, garbage dump to find those remains of those, poor women. But they're Indigenous women, so it doesn't matter. They're the throwaway people. And that's what we talk about. Like, when we talk about Indigenous rights and Indigenous wrongs, we have to look at even our wordings. I loved your opening, Nancy. It gladdens my heart when I hear that. But unfortunately, at times too, with land acknowledgements, we actually have to look at the word unceded. That's just a friendly word for stolen. It's just that it sounds better to say unceded lands. Why don't we just call it what it is, the stolen land of the Kakite people, right? That's one of the people, when we talk about what does reconciliation mean to us. Well, for me, it's education. But for Chief Larrabee, a very dear friend of mine, just over in New Westminster, her people were forcefully put into barges and shipped off from their ancestral homes where they lived for generations, stolen from their lands and not given a chance to return back. And when they finally had a chance to return back, they said, sorry, the land's already spoken for. So for them, reconciliation might be land back. Not the whole New Westminster. They're not asking for that. They're just asking just for a little place where they can feel the connection, like the way we feel connected right now. So when we look at the genocide and the wording, unceded, stolen, right? When we look at all these other words that we use, cultural genocide, that just softens the blow of what this really is, genocide. Just a week ago, they discovered more bodies. right? So it hurts us like a knife into our heart every time we find another 24 innocent children in unmarked graves. Now, these are not the documented numbers, which were astronomically high. This is the unmarked children that were murdered, that were beaten to death, that were starved to death. All of these people that died a horrible, horrible death and thrown into pits and forgotten about. We're finding those bodies, and the genocide is real. So how can we get over something where we're still finding the bodies? So Canada, on September 30th, it is a time for everyone to come in and realize, to say no more. No more hate, no more racism, no more bigotry. This is a time for us to ally all of ourselves. It doesn't matter what color you are. But the important thing is that you come together, wear an orange shirt, right? To show that we are all on the same page towards love and harmony. That is our message.
You know, Ernie, I always find it so interesting and enlightening to talk to you. And even today, I've already picked up a couple of lessons or things to help me move forward, and hopefully will help others as well. So one thing is to ask the question, would this happen if it was a non-Indigenous person? So that's sort of something measurable that we can keep in our minds, a question that we should keep asking ourselves when we see these things happening. Another thing is that you give a lot of hope. You're giving a message of hope. There's struggles, there's a lot of work to be done, but there's also some hope. And I think when the Truth and Reconciliation Commission took place, there were 94 calls to action that came out of it. And I know, talking to you previously, there's a lot of work to be done on those still, but there was one in particular that you said meant a lot to you, and it was Jordan's Principle. Can you talk just a little bit about that? What is Jordan's Principle and why is it needed?
Yes, Jordan's Principle is so important because, once again, it talks about the bureaucracy that we have to suffer towards provincial and federal. Right now, Jordan's Principle is named after Jordan River Anderson. He was born in 1999 and he only lived for 2 years. Now, his whole 2 years, he spent it in a hospital. He never had a chance to see his community. He never had a chance to go to his Cree Nation and actually be surrounded by his Muslim, his Kukum, that's grandmother and grandfather, right? He never had that time to be a child, right? So he lived in a hospital. He got sicker and sicker. And when he was getting sicker and sicker, the hospital themselves, the doctors even said, if he goes home, he would have a better quality of life. But they wouldn't release him because who was going to pay the bill? So the federal government said, well, it's a provincial, so you pay it. But they said, no, he's a status Indian. You federal people pay it. So while they were bickering back and forth, poor Jordan got sicker and sicker. Next thing you know, Jordan passed away at only 2 years of age. So a movement started. And that movement was that money should never stop the quality of life for any child. So now Jordan's Principle is set up so that if a child needs something, money shouldn't be an issue. Because come on, we're Canadians, we can afford this, right? You know, there's no problem. So it's the whole point of making sure that our children are taken care of and that they don't end up losing that quality of life. And I hope in my heart that it doesn't happen what happened to Jordan and pass away and we lose another innocent child and they become another statistic of a statistic that is already higher than this tree. Yeah.
And I think that just is a really good illustration of what you said earlier about would that happen if it was a non-Indigenous child. Yeah. So something that I think, we have to keep asking ourselves. If you could name one discrete action or one thing that you would really like to see happen during this next year, so that when we come back and talk again next September, and we can look back and say, here's something that was achieved, in the spirit of meaningful reconciliation.
Yes.
What would that be? Can you give us a little bit of a vision on what you would like to see happen?
Well, Nancy, I think I already answered that, so I'm going to recap it again. And that is something as simple as wearing that orange shirt. And please, if you are going to go out and purchase one, please make sure that before you purchase it, that there is a legitimate sign stating that the proceeds of that t-shirt money is going to go to a organization like the Gordie Dowell legacy, or the residential school survivors, but it should be somewhere, because there are a lot of orange shirt sales out there that the money's going straight back into their pockets. So we got to remember that this is a movement, and that movement does need funds to keep it going, so that we can actually continue that message and continually heal people. So wear that orange shirt, something as simple as that, an Every Child Matters shirt. And when you wear it, bring it down to one of the many Truth and Reconciliation events. We are having one on the 30th, this Saturday, at Pier Park in New Westminster. We start at 12 noon and we go until 4 o'clock. And there you're going to hear other speakers like myself. And then afterwards, there's going to be a learning powwow. Because a lot of times people think that our ceremonies, our gatherings are Indigenous only, and that's never the case, Nancy, never. So the learning powwow is going to give us an opportunity to teach non-Indigenous people what powwow means, which means gathering, right? So that means coming together. So if everyone could come to our gathering, they could understand what it is like to walk a mile in our moccasins and what it's like to dance in our moccasins. And that's what I would love, if you can all come down and join us. Pier Park, New Westminster.
And that's Saturday from noon till 4, September
Absolutely.
30th.
Yes.
Ernie, thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope that we'll have an opportunity to talk again soon.
My hands are raised to you, and thank you, and thank everyone out there. Thank you.
Nanashkamun.
Nanashkun, I am grateful.
I am as well. Thank you.